Are we just going to pretend that we don't have questions about what we saw in Uncle Jide's house? Tan said. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The question lingered, wrapping itself around Laura like a tightening coil. His voice echoed in her mind, growing louder with every repetition. Her heart pounded furiously, a cold unease gripping her chest. A sickening wave rolled in her stomach, leaving her dizzy and on the verge of nausea. 14-year-old Omolara Adegbite was the only child of her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Kemi Adegbite. She is fondly called Laura, the kind of girl who drew attention effortlessly. She had a bright, intelligent gaze that seemed to see through people, and her natural beauty, soft, dark skin, a heart-shaped face, and a gap-toothed smile only made her more endearing. Teachers often praised her quick wit, calling her a star in the making, while her peers admired her for her ability to make friends easily and her knack for storytelling. But despite her charm, Lara's life wasn't without its issues. Her parents, Kemi and Ode, were determined to give her the kind of life they had struggled to achieve. Kemi, a sharp and ambitious bank manager, often came home with files and a phone glued to her ear, while Ode, a civil engineer on the rise, juggled long work hours and contracts. Their hard work meant the family had a comfortable home in a bustling middle-class neighborhood in Lagos. Yet, their success came at a price: time. Laura, their only child, was often left to navigate the world on her own. The neighborhood, a lively community of traders, professionals, and artisans, was a haven for children. Laura spent her days running through the dusty streets, laughing and playing with her group of friends, Neka, the fiery daughter of a shopkeeper, Chidi, the quiet but clever son of a tailor, and Tand, a mischievous boy who always had a slingshot in his pocket. Together, they roamed freely, their laughter echoing past the small shops, food stalls, and churches that dotted the area. One fateful afternoon, the group decided to play hide and seek. The sun blazed in the sky, but they paid it no mind, darting in and out of alleyways and abandoned spaces. It was during one of these games that they found themselves near the house at the edge of the street, Uncle Jide's house. Uncle Jide was a peculiar figure in the neighborhood. His house, a crumbling one-story building with peeling paint and overgrown weeds, stood in stark contrast to the lively homes nearby. He lived alone and rarely interacted with anyone, though he often sat on his porch. They had seen his sharp eyes following them while they played a time or two. On this fateful day, as they crept past Uncle Jide's house, they noticed the door slightly ajar. A sense of curiosity gripped them as they wondered what the inside of his house might look like. Tand, ever the bold one, was the first to step inside. The others hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances, but eventually followed. The interior of the house greeted them with a faint smell of cigarettes mixed with a musty, stale odor that made Lara's nose crinkle in discomfort. In the dimly lit living room, Uncle Jide was sprawled on a worn-out three-seater sofa, a bottle of beer in hand. The flickering glow of the television illuminated his face as he watched a strange movie, his expression unreadable. The children perched nervously behind the worn-out chairs as a movie played on the television. At first, they giggled and whispered to themselves the triumph of the mischievous adventure they had undertaken, but as the scenes on the screen grew strange, their smile faded. The movie wasn't like anything they had seen before. It wasn't the action-packed Nollywood films they were used to. It was something darker, more unsettling. Lara's stomach churned as she realized they shouldn't be there. She looked at her friends, her eyes wide, silently urging them to leave. That night, Lara couldn't sleep. The images from the movie played over and over in her mind, the picture of naked men and women engaging in strange unspeakable acts. She didn't fully understand what she had seen, but it left her feeling dirty, confused, and scared. It awakened a sense of curiosity that she couldn't ignore. The next morning, she avoided her friends and stayed indoors, pretending to read a book. But her mother noticed the change in her. "Lara, are you okay? You've been quiet," Kemi said, sitting beside her on the couch. Lara's throat tightened. She wanted to tell her mother everything, but she was afraid of the consequences. Just then, Kemi's phone rang, and in her usual manner, she went off to answer the call, forgetting the concerns she had noticed in her daughter, never to visit the topic again. A few days later, when Lara could no longer avoid her friends, she decided to check on them. The quietness in their usual chatter revealed an unspoken truth: they were all troubled by the same lingering thoughts. They made an effort to resume their usual games and mischievous adventures, but something had changed. The carefree joy they once shared was replaced by a nagging unease that none of them could ignore. It was as though an invisible weight pressed on their hearts, waiting to be acknowledged. After a few hours of trying to distract themselves, Tan suddenly blurted out, "Are we just going to pretend we don't have questions about what we saw in Uncle Jide's house?" His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The group exchanged nervous glances before launching into a flurry of whispered conversations. Each of them shared the same gnawing curiosity, and it wasn't long before they made a bold decision: they had to go back to Uncle Jide's house. This time, they lingered longer, their eyes glued to the unsettling images on the screen, watching with a strange mix of fascination and discomfort. When the tension became unbearable, they fled to Lara's house, where they knew they wouldn't be interrupted. In the privacy of her room, they hesitated before nervously removing their clothes, trying to mimic what they had seen. The awkwardness of the moment quickly overwhelmed them. Embarrassed and confused, they pulled their clothes back on and left in silence, each retreating to their own thoughts. The experience left them more troubled than before, their unease deepened by an insatiable curiosity. Despite their confusion, they found themselves drawn back to Uncle Jide's house again and again, sneaking in to watch more scenes. Their attempts to replicate what they saw never seemed to satisfy the strange urge they felt, as though something crucial was missing. Their secret routine continued, each visit tightening the grip of their obsession. Then, one day, Uncle Jide caught them in his house, watching this strange movie. Instead of anger, his expression was unsettlingly calm. He invited them into his sitting room and, in a low voice, instructed them to remove their clothes. Fear and confusion swirled in their minds, but his commanding presence left them paralyzed. One by one, he forced them to act out the scenes they had watched, involving both themselves and him. For the first time, the children crossed a line they barely understood, engaging in acts that left them deeply shaken. When it was over, they dressed in silence, their hearts pounding with fear and shame. Uncle Jide's voice broke the tension as he said, "Don't tell anyone about this. This is our little secret." His smile was cold, devoid of warmth, and it sent a chill down their spines as they walked out of the house, their innocence irrevocably shattered. The visits to Uncle Jide's house became a troubling routine. Lara and her friends, drawn by the allure of the forbidden, found themselves returning despite the unease they felt. Uncle Jide's influence grew insidious. He showed them more explicit content and began to coerce them into acts that left them confused and ashamed. Their innocence, once a shield, now felt like a burden they couldn't shed. At school, Lara's performance began to falter. Her once pristine handwriting grew sloppy, her homework incomplete. Her teachers noticed the change, but they attributed it to typical teenage rebellion. Only Mrs. Iniola, a compassionate teacher who lived down the street, sensed something was deeply wrong. "Lara," she said gently one afternoon after class, "you've been so quiet lately. Is everything okay?" Lara nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze. But Mrs. Iniola wasn't convinced. She began observing Lara more closely, noting the whispered conversations and the way she and her friends avoided eye contact with adults. One evening, Mrs. Iniola's suspicions were confirmed. She saw the group entering Uncle Jide's house and decided to investigate. Pretending to need assistance, just as was about to knock, she saw the door slightly open and walked in. What she found inside left her horrified. The children, caught stark naked in a compromising situation, were frozen in fear. Mrs. Inyola acted swiftly, reporting the matter to the authorities. The police arrested Uncle Jide, and the children were questioned. The truth spilled out, unraveling a web of neglect and exploitation. Kemi and Ode were devastated, their guilt palpable as they confronted the reality of what their absence had allowed. Lara's voice trembled as she whispered to her mother, "I didn't mean to, Mama. I didn't mean to go inside his house." Kemi froze, the cup of tea in her hand shattering on the tiled kitchen floor. Ade's booming voice from the living room demanded, "What house? Whose house, Lara?" For a moment, the hum of their comfortable middle-class life stilled, replaced by the crackling tension of a family about to unravel. They restricted Lara from meeting her friends, took away some of her belongings, and revoked certain privileges in an attempt to address the obvious problem. However, situations like this don't call for quick fixes but require consistent teaching, correction, and guidance efforts that their busy lives sadly couldn't accommodate. For a while, things seemed to improve. Kemi and Ode adjusted their schedules to spend more time with Lara. Counseling sessions were arranged, and the family tried to rebuild what had been broken. But old habits die hard. As the weeks turned into months, Kemi's demanding job and Ade's projects pulled them back into their old routines. Left unsupervised once more, Lara and her friends reverted to their destructive behavior. Without Uncle Jide's presence, Tan the bolder and mischievous one in the group took the lead, urging them to continue what they had started. It was no longer about curiosity, it had become a coping mechanism, a way to make sense of the confusion and pain they carried. Lara's health began to decline. She grew pale and lethargic, her once bright eyes dull. When Kemi finally took her to the hospital, the diagnosis was devastating. Lara was pregnant, and further tests revealed she was HIV positive. The news sent shockwaves through the community as other children in the group were also found to be infected. The parents, consumed by guilt, were forced to confront their failures. They sought medical treatment and counseling for their children, but the scars ran deep. For Lara, the road to healing was long and uncertain, her once bright future clouded by the weight of her experiences. Truly, what would have been an exciting future for Lara and her friends now turned out to be a nightmare that they were entangled with for the rest of their lives. What would be the outcome of Lara's life as uncertainty plagued them like a taskmaster that wouldn't budge? Only time will tell.